They say true love is worth waiting for.
She felt like he was somebody good for her and her son.
But sometimes, when you think you've found true love, what's actually true becomes hard to distinguish.
He had a past record. He had been incarcerated before.
It didn't seem like she knew what she was getting into with this relationship.
I think they were shooting towards the house. They were screaming and yelling.
When the unthinkable happens, how far will you go to protect your man?
Oh my God, this boy's dead.
She was pretty adamant that she wasn't involved, and neither was her boyfriend.
I'm sorry. I don't see it. Ain't nothing that you can tell me that make me believe that he killed somebody.
Friday, July 29th, 2011. It's a hot summer night in Victoria, Texas.
We call ourselves the Crossroads. We're in between major cities, so we're kind of equidistant from Austin, Houston, San Antonio, Corpus Christi.
As locals settle in for the night, Victoria Police Dispatch receives multiple concerned calls about a disturbance on Ash and Pine Streets.
Victoria 911.
Okay, I just called in. There's a big party over here in this my neighborhood. Now there's some kids fighting in this park.
In the park?
Yes. The cops haven't gotten here yet. It's getting crazy.
Patrol quickly heads to the neighborhood.
They make their way to an area where people are yelling and learn the fight started at a house party and ended up in the middle of the street.
Officers learn which house on Ash Street was hosting the party, and that it's rented by two brothers.
They went to the house where the party was being held. The individuals that were renting the house, Robert Gomez, Michael Gomez, did cooperate, and they did admit to the officers that they were having a party at the house.
Michael tells officers that he throws parties a lot and announces them on social media.
He would buy kegs of beer, and he would buy red Solo cups, and he would sell each cup for $20, all you can drink. There was no age limit. He didn't ask for ID or anything like that. And they explained that some people had showed up. Apparently, they took a cup without paying for it and filled it with beer.
Michael says his sister saw them take the cup.
His sister approached them with that and asked them if they paid for that cup of beer. And one of the individuals stated to her that they weren't going to pay for it because the kegs were almost empty. So she slapped the cup out of one of the individual's hands. He called her some vulgar type words. She ended up slapping him.
Robert and Michael stated that once the people started to fight, it got out of control, and then people were fighting everywhere.
When sirens filled the air, everyone involved vanished.
With everybody either gone or hiding out somewhere, the officers decided to head back to the station.
Then, as 3 a.m. rolls around, a flurry of urgent 911 calls come into the Victoria Police Department from the same neighborhood.
There's some shooting out there. It's right on the side of our house. I live in the house and I heard it.
Okay.
One of the callers says he saw at least 2 people shooting.
The back and
Okay,
forth.
so there's two people just by the car shooting back and forth at each other?
Yeah, I think they were shooting towards our house. They were screaming and yelling.
And then how many shots did you hear?
Over 10.
When police return, people have cleared out. It's obvious the shooters are gone.
One of the first people they talked to was the local pastor who lived at the corner. He's one of the people who reported that shots were fired.
Unfortunately, the pastor never saw who was shooting.
The officer went outside with his flashlight, looked at the house, and did discover that there were rounds that were in the wood of the house. He takes pictures of the pastor's house. He goes and he finds 13 9mm shell casings laying in the street. And there was some 22 bullets discovered and some shotgun shell casings.
Officers have no idea what's going on, who was involved, and who was doing the shooting. But they know at least 3 different guns were used.
The officers actually did a search. They walked behind people's houses. They searched everywhere. They looked to see if there was anything they could find, anybody that was injured, anything. And they found nothing. They left the scene.
Then, 6 hours later, around noon, a woman named Vivian Rivera calls Victoria Dispatch.
She tells police that her 24-year-old fiancé, Daniel Davila, was missing.
Vivian lets the police know that she last heard from Daniel between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. and that he was going to a party, but Daniel never came home, and she's wondering what's going on.
Born October 26, 1986, Texas native Daniel Davila was raised with strong family values.
Daniel came from a loving, Christian, church-going family. They enjoyed a wonderful life. His parents were very hardworking.
They instilled the same work ethic in their son, and he was an auto glass tech. He worked for a company called Safe Light and did really well for himself.
In his early 20s, he was lucky enough to find his special someone.
He met a wonderful woman by the name of Vivian, and they quickly fell head over heels in love. They were inseparable.
And before long, Daniel and Vivian got engaged and started planning a life together.
Daniel was excited about his life with Vivian. He had 2 beautiful daughters.
His dreams of a picture-perfect family were coming true, and he had a bright future ahead of him.
But now Daniel is missing, and Vivian is beside herself with worry.
She said when she woke up and saw that he wasn't home, she tried to call Daniel, but he wasn't answering his phone.
She had no idea where he was, so she wanted to report him missing.
Vivian describes Daniel and says that he was last wearing a pink shirt, khaki shorts, and he has a tattoo on his arm that says Tatum.
As police prepare to launch a missing persons investigation, they suddenly receive another distressed call.
Victoria 911, where's your emergency?
We got a man out here on the ground.
In July 2011, after a massive fight occurred during a party that ended in gunshots being fired, Victoria, Texas police are now looking for missing 24-year-old Daniel Davila.
His fiancée, Vivian Rivera, said that he never came home after going to that same party.
Shortly after that, another 911 phone call came in, again from the local pastor's house.
Victoria 911, where's your emergency?
Yeah, we got a man out here on the ground.
Okay, and what did he just like passed out or what?
I don't know.
You're not too sure? Okay.
Oh my God, this boy's dead.
Officers race back out to the scene on Ash Street. When officers arrive, the pastor shows them to the side of the house.
Officers find a young man lying face down. He's wearing a pink shirt and khaki shorts, and they confirm that he's deceased.
There are no obvious wounds they can see, but officers quickly inform emergency services and detectives.
We were summoned to the area to start the initial investigation. We located the victim. He was laying in between a house and a shed. And then we were able to identify that the subject we had was Daniel Davila, based on pictures, and the missing persons report being filed at the same time as we were out with his body. At that point, we processed the crime scene. When we rolled him over, we saw he had a gunshot wound into his gut. We became aware of the shots fired call from the night before. So we began looking for any evidence that might connect to how this body ended up in this yard.
Investigators believe when the gunfire rang out, Daniel must have gotten hit and tried to make it home.
It looked like he had been going possibly down the alleyway or had maybe been in the storage building hiding and come out and just collapsed.
As the body is removed for an autopsy, investigators speak with Michael Gomez, who was hosting the party. He tells detectives that he knows Daniel Davila.
He says Daniel was at a club last night, but then arrived after the fight broke out, and that he showed up because he heard that a party was going on.
Michael said he heard gunshots around 3 a.m., but he didn't see a vehicle and he didn't know where the shots were coming from. So he just ran into the house.
So because Daniel Davila lived so close to them, they believed that Daniel had went home. So during that time, they were kind of in shock.
As authorities find more residents who attended the party, new details emerge.
There was one witness who saw an individual with a shotgun and about 3 other people getting into a silver car and leaving the scene.
Another witness said she saw the fight happen, but she left around the same time everyone else did when she heard the police sirens.
She also said afterwards she went to the local convenience store, and that's when she saw the same group of people there that were asked to leave the party. She said she recognized one of the guys from the group.
She was in high school, so she identified Jeffrey Hill as being another student at one of the local schools. And so that was the first lead that law enforcement had.
Within hours, police tracked down 17-year-old Jeff Hill.
I made contact with Jeffrey Hill and brought him to the police station. He agreed to provide an interview.
Jeff admits that he heard about the party on social media, and that when he arrived, that's when the fight broke out. He said that his friend, 19-year-old Josh McClure, started the fight.
He explained to them about a confrontation that Josh got slapped, which kind of goes back to what Michael Gomez said about the beer drinking and the cups.
When Josh started fighting, they started jumping him. They hit him with a beer bottle. So me and my other friend, we jumped in and tried to break it up. But like 2 or 3 grown men came out there, and then before you know it, a fight break out.
Jeff claims that he and his friends were drastically outnumbered. Then police showed up.
So everybody left. I left after the first fight.
You weren't there with them when they started shooting?
No.
Sensing Jeff knows more, the investigator puts on the pressure.
So there was shots that were fired. One of them hit a guy. But if you keep dancing around it and not telling me the truth, it's going to look real bad for you.
Jeff takes some time and thinks about it, and then he starts to tell more.
We got there and everything. Then the fight broke out. I was riding with them, but I didn't know they was gonna shoot.
But you were with them when they shot.
Mm-hmm.
Who was shooting? Somebody dies, whether it's natural causes or, in this case, criminal. One of the hardest parts of the job is notifying their family who don't know yet. And you never know how people are going to react. A lot of times there's disbelief. I've had the door shut in my face because they don't want to accept what's going on. I've had people just fall down. It's one of the harder parts of the job because you have to tell them and there's nothing you can do to ease their pain.
Homicide investigators in Victoria, Texas, are questioning 17-year-old Jeff Hill to find out who was shooting off guns after a fight on Ash Street that ended up killing Daniel Davila. Jeff states that it all started because of the fight that broke out involving his friend, Josh McClure.
When they left the party after the confrontation, he says Josh McClure was really angry. He wanted to retaliate.
Joshua McClure was looking for people to go back to the party with him, to back him up, because he knew that they were outnumbered if he was to go back. So at that time, Joshua McClure made a phone call.
Within no time, he says a guy named Mar arrived with a friend who he only knew as Doughboy.
Jeff said that they all piled into a few cars and drove back to where the party was.
He says when he came around the corner, some of the guys came out of the party house. And that's when the shooting started.
Who was shooting?
It was a dude named Mar. And this dude, they call him Doughboy or something like that.
He claims he doesn't know their real names, and they were the only ones he saw shooting.
What were they using? Do you know what kind of guns they had?
Oh, it's pistols.
Based on the casings and bullet fragments left at the scene, investigators know that 3 guns were used, not 2. The guns were a .22, a 9mm, and a shotgun. So who was the third shooter?
Jeff was asked if he knew the person who was killed, and he said he didn't know who Daniel was.
Investigators decide to let him go for now, while they look for Josh McClure and try to figure out who Mar and Doughboy are. That evening, around 9 p.m., officers locate and bring in 19-year-old Josh McClure.
He started with, he wasn't involved, he didn't know what happened.
Okay, so, and I know there's more to this, okay?
I was, like, I don't remember nothing, I don't remember anything.
Finally, Josh realizes the seriousness of his situation.
Josh eventually admitted he went back over there for the shooting.
I was on the back left.
Okay. Who's in the front right?
I think it was Mar.
What's Mar's full name?
He says Mar is 20-year-old Marcellus Brown.
Okay. Who's in the back seat? Next to you.
Jeffrey?
He also places Marcellus's girlfriend there, 30-year-old Kia Johnson.
Who's driving?
Kia? I think it was Kia. Kia was driving.
He says she was driving the silver car, which matches what a witness had seen.
So what was the plan going back over there?
I was gonna go back to fight.
Okay. When did it turn into somebody shooting?
Josh said that when they pulled up to the party house, that a bunch of guys came out and started running towards them.
Josh says that's when Marcellus pulled out his gun and started unloading on them. He also doesn't seem to know anything about Doughboy.
Josh also says he doesn't even know who Daniel is.
I asked him if he had used his phone that night to contact Marcellus Brown to go over there after the original fight, and he confirmed he had. So at that point, we seized his phone as evidence.
Investigators try to press on, but before they're able to get anything more from Josh, their interview gets interrupted.
Josh's sister, Erica McClure, shows up, and they allow her in the room with him for questioning.
She made some statements that made it obvious she had knowledge of what happened, but she was constantly trying to keep Josh from giving us any information.
They don't have you on nothing. You didn't do shit. You wasn't even there.
She tells Josh, don't talk anymore, and she takes him home.
Where your phone at?
Despite the interrogation getting cut short, detectives have enough for the arrest of Marcellus Brown.
We had both Jeffrey Hill and Joshua McClure implicate Marcellus in shooting, which we believe led to Daniel Davila's death. Both Josh and Jeff were still distancing themselves from the event.
Detectives check out Marcellus's criminal history to see who they're dealing with.
Marcellus Brown, he had a past record. He had been incarcerated before.
Turns out he was out on parole and had just got out of prison for some past drug offenses.
On Sunday, July 31st, 2011, around noon, detectives show up to his girlfriend Kia's apartment looking for him.
Since Josh said she was there at the shooting and driving her silver car, they also wanted to speak with Kia Johnson.
Born in 1980, Kia Johnson grew up in Dallas, Texas.
Kia went to church. She was an active member in her community, and she was someone that people were really fond of.
In high school, Kia met somebody, and everything was great until she found out she was pregnant in 1997.
Kia soon found herself a single mom struggling to provide for her son.
In 2006, Kia starts working at the school district cafeteria to provide for her and her son.
It wasn't always easy, but Kia made it work. She hoped to find a partner that could one day help her carry the load.
And in April 2011, Kia found everything she was looking for in 20-year-old Marcellus Mar Brown.
Kia had this instant connection with Marcellus that she had never felt before.
Even though Marcellus was younger than Kia, she felt like he was very ambitious and that he had a good head on his shoulders and that he was somebody good for her and her son.
Kia knew that Marcellus would be the perfect man to complete her family. But now it seems that future might be put on hold. 24 hours after the shooting, Investigators arrive at Kia's apartment, ready to arrest her boyfriend for murder.
Kia told us that Marcellus wasn't there. We saw a car that was a silver Nissan.
So it's looking like the witnesses in Josh's statement are matching up so far.
They bring Kia to the station to ask her about the shooting. But she says investigators have it all wrong and points the finger at someone else.
I've known him to do things to people. I've known him to
we turn off.
breaking houses, kick door people, him and his buddies.
Detectives in Victoria, Texas, have brought in Kia Johnson, who they believe is involved with several others in the murder of Daniel Davila, an innocent victim in a retaliation attack.
She denied knowing anything about anybody being shot or the shooting.
I didn't even know what happened, and I was never at no party.
Kia informs officers that she had spent the entire day on July 29th with her boyfriend, Marcellus Brown, until about 10:30 at night.
Mark went to Lundale to his friend's house.
She did admit that Erica McClure had called her about Josh getting involved in a fight on Ash Street and getting jumped. So she claimed that she and Erica went back over to the party just to see what happened and heard people talking about Josh getting jumped and possibly coming back to fight. But then she and Erica left.
Detectives tell Kia that Josh placed her at the shooting, driving the car, and also put a gun in Marcellus's hand that night. Kia quickly denies it.
She was pretty adamant most of the time that she wasn't involved, and neither was her boyfriend, Marcellus.
I don't see murder in him at all. I watch him with my son. I don't see it. I'm sorry. I don't see it. Ain't nothing that you can tell me to make me believe that he killed somebody. I'm sorry.
Kia also informs investigators that if there's anyone they should be looking at, it's Josh.
Do you think Josh did it?
If you ask me, I've seen Josh in action. I've known him to do things to people. I've known him to
we turn off.
Breaking houses, kick door people, him and his buddies. That Jeff is one of them.
According to her, Josh and his friends have a history of getting into trouble together, and now his sister Erica is coming in to clean up his mess.
Kia says she thinks they're all trying to pin this on her and her boyfriend to save themselves. Detectives don't buy it.
Her interview, I don't think, led to a lot other than it was obviously deceptive at that point.
Then, detectives get an unexpected surprise.
Marcellus Brown called and offered to come down for an interview.
Brown said that when he was at his friend's house, that Josh McClure called him.
Talking about he just got jumped and this and that. Dude. I'm like, what? What you mean you just got jumped?
Marcellus says he didn't meet up with them and stayed with his friend at his place for a while.
So after that, I went home and went to bed. I didn't never go to no party.
Marcellus was adamant that he wasn't involved at all in the fight. His alibi was that he was with a friend all night and gives the detectives that friend's name.
Unfortunately for him, when we went to confirm that with the friend claimed he hadn't been with them all that day. And so that kind of helped confirm that he wasn't telling the truth.
You were in that car. I can place you in that car. Your girlfriend's driving the damn car. And the problem is, you're gonna put her in jail too.
I'm telling you, I promise you I'm
denying you were there. No, you're not. You were there, and I can put a gun in your hand.
While we were questioning him and letting him know we knew he was involved, he decided he wanted to leave and didn't want to talk anymore. And that's the point at which we placed him under arrest for the murder.
Detectives are confident they have their man. But they're about to find out that there's much more to the story.
I haven't had a night of sleep, eat, or thought that I ain't thought about that man in the red shirt.
July 31st, 2011, Victoria, Texas. Police have arrested Marcellus Brown for the murder of Daniel Davila. But they know he's not the only one that should be sitting in jail.
We were pretty confident he was involved. We still believed other people were involved at that point.
That morning, Daniel Davila's autopsy is complete.
When we got the medical examiner's report, it confirmed that he died from a gunshot wound and that the bullet that killed him was a 9mm. That was crucial in a way because we knew the guns involved in the shooting. One was a shotgun, one was a .22 revolver, and one was a 9mm pistol.
The evidence starts to pile up when data from Josh's phone reveals some incriminating texts.
Josh tells Erica that he's going to tell the truth.
But Erica was telling Josh not to admit to anything, not to say anything.
Investigators are on the right track. But they still need more. They continue to look for the mysterious Doughboy.
Once we had Marcellus in custody, we started going back and doing further interviews with Josh, with Jeff. We interviewed Erica. Kia was interviewed again. We started interviewing witnesses.
During these interviews, they were able to confirm that Erica not only knew more than what they thought, but she was at the shooting as well.
The remaining friends all stick to their story and refuse to tell the whole truth.
I don't think they had really planned any elaborate stories together because they gave such disparate statements. I think they were all just coming up with individual stories to try to cover their involvement.
Even without their cooperation, on August 5th, 2011, detectives have enough to charge them all with engaging in organized criminal activity, discharge of a firearm, and murder.
Anytime you have a group of 3 or more that are conspiring to commit that murder, then you also have a charge of engaging in organized criminal activity.
After they are all arrested, detectives get word that Kia wants to talk.
I had denied the first time because I was afraid.
Okay.
I ain't been able to eat. I haven't been able to sleep or think.
Realizing how much trouble she was in, she finally admitted that she drove Erica, Josh, Jeff, and Marcellus to the party house and then back.
She confirmed a lot of what we already knew had happened. Erica was, I think, as upset as Josh that he got hit with a beer bottle in the fight. Marcellus was the one that Josh was really looking to get to go help him. But Kia, being Marcellus's girlfriend, I guess jumped right in with it. She drove the car for them to go over there.
So anyway, we went, and I guess they must have seen us when we came into the neighborhood.
Because immediately everybody at the party starts running across Pine Street Park to go engage them.
All I heard is from behind me, a big boom. And so I saw the guy kind of stagger, but he got up.
She claims it was Jeff Hill and Josh McClure.
When I heard that big boom, and I turned around, there was Josh with that thing in his hand. And he racked it back again and shot again. That's when Jeff shot past him. Both of them were kind of running together, but Jeffrey made sure that that guy didn't leave from that spot.
Yet she still fails to incriminate her man.
You keep leaving Marcel out of this?
This is the one time where he was just actually at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Kia says that Josh singled the guy out because he must have been the one that hit him with the beer bottle.
You know what sucks about that? The guy wasn't even at the party when they were there.
What?
He wasn't even at the party. He didn't get in a fight.
So he was an innocent bystander.
This man's innocent.
Investigators step out of the room for a while, and Kia begins to pray.
Lord Jesus. Forgive me, Lord Jesus. Forgive me.
And when they come back in, Kia decides it's time to finally lay all her cards on the table.
So I'm going to be honest about anything that y'all ask me.
Did you see Marcellus shooting a gun?
I did.
Case was ultimately devastating because an innocent bystander who had nothing to do with the disagreement that happened has now lost his life. His daughters have to grow up without a father. And Kia, if she truly wanted to help her man, she could have helped him to reason with the situation. And this is just a sad case of when you use impulsive decision-making and you don't think through your decisions.
Police have finally made 5 arrests in connection with the murder of Daniel Davila.
Police have arrested Kia and her boyfriend Marcellus, Josh and Erica McClure, and Jeff Hill. They were charged with murder, engaging in organized criminal activity, and deadly conduct with a weapon.
That's when Kia Johnson changes her story and turns on her boyfriend.
Let me go on and get this out of my chest.
Kia says after the fight, the group went to the convenience store. And then they all met up at her apartment.
Marcellus was upset that Josh had gotten beaten up in the fight and hit with a bottle. And that's kind of where they hatched the plan to go back over there with guns. Kia actually provided him with the guns.
Marcellus Brown told Kia to get them the guns that he had stashed at her house. So at that time, Kia Johnson gives a 9mm pistol to Marcellus Brown. She gives a .22 rifle to Jeffrey Hill, and she gives a shotgun to Joshua McClure.
Did you see Marcellus shooting a gun?
I did. I saw Marcellus shoot a gun.
At that point, he even confirmed Marcellus had told her later that he was shooting the 9mm, which is the gun that fired the killing bullet.
Authorities search for the guns, but they're never recovered.
As for the mystery man, only known as Doughboy, detectives believe he doesn't exist.
So we never identified Doughboy. When Jeff Hill was originally telling us who the people were in the car, he didn't want to place himself in the car because he didn't want to place himself as part of the shooting. So he needed somebody to fill his spot in the car, and I think that's why he brought up Doughboy.
With Kia's statement tying everything together, prosecutors finally have everything they need for trial.
So there were actually multiple trials because we had multiple suspects.
In September 2012, more than a year after the killing of Daniel Davila, the first trial officially begins with Marcellus Brown.
Jeff makes a deal with prosecutors and testifies against Marcellus. He testifies that he fired the .22, Marcellus fired the 9mm, and Josh fired the shotgun.
Kia also testifies against her boyfriend and explains why she helped cover for him.
Not only does she put the future of her child in jeopardy, she now puts her future in jeopardy, all because of a short-term relationship, not really even thinking about the impact that it would have.
When the jury comes back with the verdict, it's a shock to everyone.
The jury found him not guilty on murder. I think they were just having trouble deciding who held the actual gun that fired the killing shot. But they did convict him on engaging in organized criminal activity and in deadly conduct discharged firearm.
With his prior felonies, Marcellus is given a hefty sentence of 60 years. He'll be eligible for parole after 30 years.
Due to his cooperation, Jeffrey was given a plea bargain. He pleaded out to organized criminal activity and deadly conduct. Jeffrey Hill was given 8 years for each charge to run concurrently.
Josh and Erica McClure chose to be tried together, and neither were convicted of murder.
However, both were convicted for engaging in organized criminal activity and deadly conduct discharge firearm, and they both received identical sentences of 20 years in prison and a $10,000 fine.
Kia Johnson pleaded out to 10 years probation. The reason for that is that Kia Johnson did cooperate with us and did tell us a lot about what had truly happened.
Then, in 2015, a judge revoked her probation for assaulting a Dallas police officer.
He then sentenced her to 30 years for the murder and 10 years for engaging in organized criminal activity.
After everything was done, I do think justice was served. While originally there weren't murder convictions in court, they did receive sentences which...
Justice for a ghost. 30-year-old cold case solved in stunning twist. The clock on the precinct wall never truly stopped for Detective Elias Thorne. It just ticked in rhythm with the heartbeat of a mystery that refused to die. 30 years ago, in the sleepy, sun-drenched town of Oakhaven, a young woman vanished into the dense, suffocating woods that bordered the community, leaving behind only a single silk ribbon caught on a jagged briar and a silence that would scream for 3 decades. The case was a ghost story before the ink on the initial report was even dry, a cold case that mocked the badge and the brilliance of every investigator who dared to tread the path of her final known footsteps. The woods didn't talk. The witnesses were ghosts of their former selves, and the trail, if it had ever existed, had been washed away by the relentless passage of time and the indifference of the elements. It was a perfect crime, or so it seemed, until a routine archival audit, a process designed to be a bureaucratic formality, unlocked a digital cache that had been buried in a mislabeled drive since 1996. This was the spark that ignited the powder keg of a long-dormant investigation, pulling the threads of a narrative so twisted, so deeply embedded in the hierarchy of the town, that the resolution didn't just solve a murder, it brought the entire community to its knees. We are talking about a revelation so stunning, a twist so surgically precise, that it turned the town's heroes into suspects and the victim's memory into a weapon of absolute truth. As the sirens began to wail through the streets, tearing through the thin veil of Oak Haven's manufactured serenity, the people standing on their porches knew that the world they had curated for 30 years was about to be burned to the ground. The ghost had finally spoken, not from beyond the grave, but from the cold, hard, unblinking data of a forgotten secret that had been hiding in plain sight, protected by the very people who had sworn an oath to find justice. The air in the Oak Haven forest that night was thick with a scent of damp earth and pine, a heavy, oppressive atmosphere that seemed to swallow the light of the search party's lanterns. The victim, Sarah Jenkins, was 22, a bright-eyed artist whose canvas was the world, until that world narrowed to the claustrophobic confines of those deep, unforgiving woods. When the search teams moved through the undergrowth, they were looking for a person, but they found only the absence of one, a terrifying, hollow space where a life should have been. The investigation that followed was a masterclass in frustration, a frantic, disorganized scramble that mirrored the panicked pulse of a town suddenly confronted with the reality of its own vulnerability. Every neighbor was a suspect, every secret was a potential clue, and yet, the deeper the detectives dug, the more the earth seemed to pull away, leaving them with nothing but rumors and the haunting memory of a woman who had simply stepped into the shadows. The community became a pressure cooker, the walls of the small town closing in as the suspect list grew, shrank, and then vanished, leaving the case to drift into the realm of the unsolvable. They looked at the local drifters, the jilted lovers, the eccentric loners, never once glancing at the polished, respectable pillars of their own social order who held the keys to the town's most guarded rooms. The file became a tombstone, a silent monument to failure, its pages slowly turning yellow, the faces in the photos aging from vibrant youth to a static, monochromatic blur. Decades of dead ends created a unique kind of erosion in Oak Haven. The tragedy became a myth, a bedtime story told to keep children away from the Treeline, a dark secret that the town chose to forget rather than confront. The investigators who had devoted their careers to the hunt, like Thorne, lived with the ghost of Sarah Jenkins in the back of their minds, a phantom presence that nagged at their conscience, a reminder of the one who didn't come home. They kept the notes, they revisited the scene, they obsessed over the minor, discarded details, a scrap of fabric, a whisper of a lead, a shadow in a photograph, but the silence of the woods remained absolute. The mystery was a parasite that lived off the town's collective denial, a festering wound that no amount of time could truly heal. It was a case of institutional amnesia, where the desire for peace outweighed the need for justice, and where the truth was considered too high a price to pay for the stability of a town that desperately needed to believe it was safe. But truth, when suppressed, only gains intensity, waiting for the singular, violent rupture that will force it into the open, a process that began in the most mundane, unpromising way imaginable, a file cabinet, a mislabeled disc, and a detective who is tired of being defeated by the ghost of a 30-year-old crime. The audit was supposed to be a standard review of the department's cold storage protocols, a way to clear out the digital clutter before moving to a cloud-based architecture. Thorne, working with a team of fresh-faced, technologically inclined analysts, was systematically checking the directory paths of legacy servers that had been offline since the early 90s. It was the kind of tedious, soul-sapping labor that drives investigators to drink until they clicked on a file path that shouldn't have existed. It was a hidden directory encrypted with a rudimentary, almost archaic code, A digital vault that had been bypassed by every previous sweep, hidden behind the administrative overrides of a precinct head who had long since retired. When the analyst hit the key, the screen flooded with digitized crime scene photographs, audio recordings, and a manifest of evidence that had supposedly been lost or never collected. The room fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Here was the truth, staring back at them from the cold glare of a monitor, a treasure trove of information that had been stolen from the original investigation. It wasn't just evidence. It was a roadmap to a cover-up so elaborate, so devious, that it could only have been engineered by someone who knew exactly how to dismantle a police investigation from the inside out. The ghost had finally opened the door, and the light that spilled out was going to incinerate everything in its path. The forensic team, now operating under a level of intensity that made the original investigation look like a parlor game, worked through the nights, cross-referencing the secret cache against the public records of Oakhaven. Every name in the file was a potential point of infection, every document a thread in a tapestry of deceit that stretched from the precinct floor to the town's highest political offices. The revelations were instantaneous and jarring. There were interviews with witnesses who had been told to go home, forensic reports that had been altered, and physical evidence that had been systematically mismanaged to point the blame away from the primary suspect. The killer hadn't just gotten away with it. They had been protected, facilitated, and even mentored by the very system that was supposed to capture them. The stun level of the discovery was palpable. The detectives weren't just pursuing a murderer. They were pursuing a rot that had infiltrated the entire town's power structure. The suspect wasn't a shadow. He was a legacy of the town, a man protected by a brotherhood that viewed justice as a negotiable commodity rather than an immutable law. The shock didn't just rock the suburb. It sent tremors through the entire legal landscape of the state, as the realization set in that the Oakhaven ghost hadn't been haunting the town, he had been running it. As the detectives, operating with the stealth of a special operations unit, began to move on the targets identified in the digital vault, the town of Oakhaven found itself in the eye of a gathering storm. They didn't announce the warrants. They executed them with a precision that bordered on the clinical, hitting multiple locations simultaneously to prevent the erasure of further evidence. The primary suspect, now a man in his 60s who had held the position of town council president, was taken from his home during a gala event, let out in cuffs while the town's elite stood in horrified, paralyzing silence. The optics were incendiary. The man who had been the face of their community, the man who had laid the wreaths for Sarah Jenkins' memorial every year, was the one who had extinguished her life. The community's collapse was immediate. The veneer of respectability that had defined their existence for 3 decades vanished, leaving them exposed to a reality that was raw, ugly, and undeniably true. The rumors became headlines, the headlines became indictments, and the indictments became the final, crushing blow to the identity of Oakhaven. It wasn't just that a crime had been solved. It was the realization that the town's moral compass had been shattered, its history rewritten by the revelation that their quiet life had been built on the foundation of a stolen life and a buried, bloody secret. The interrogation room, where the council president sat, became the site of a profound, existential struggle. He didn't break with a confession. He broke with a cold, terrifying admission that the crime had been a test, a brutal exercise in power that had proven he was untouchable. He spoke of the night of the disappearance with the chilling indifference of a man describing a hunting trip, his words dripping with the arrogance of someone who had spent his life convinced that his status was a divine mandate. The detectives didn't need to press him. The evidence they had salvaged from the digital vault was enough to bury him, and the arrogance of his confession only guaranteed that the trial would be a summary execution of his public persona. He was a man who had lived in the comfort of a lie for so long that the truth was the only thing that felt alien, and in his attempt to defend his actions, he only served to deepen the horror of the realization. He had taken Sarah Jenkins not because he had to, but because he could, and he had silenced the town not because he was afraid, but because he was bored. It was a revelation that transcended the brutality of the murder, highlighting a pathology of entitlement that had successfully colonized the entire town's sense of self. The trial, held in a neighboring county to avoid the taint of local influence, was a courtroom drama that pulled the veil completely away from the Oakhaven case. The prosecution's opening statement was a searing indictment of not just the killer, but the entire culture of silence that had enabled him. They brought forward witness after witness. People who had seen the corruption, people who had been threatened, people who had been forced to bury their own conscience to survive in the town's suffocating atmosphere. The courtroom was a stage where the 30-year-old mystery was laid out, piece by agonizing piece, for the entire world to see. The victim's family, sitting in the front row, became the silent, harrowing focal point of the proceedings, their faces a map of the grief that had been forced to wait 3 decades for a name, a cause, and a face. It wasn't just a murder trial. It was an exorcism, a process of purging the town of the evil that had resided in its core. The public, watching the coverage from afar, were united in their disgust, the case becoming a national sensation that pushed the boundaries of the true crime genre, a story that was too horrific to believe, but too true to ignore. In Oakhaven, the reaction was a complex, volatile mix of anger, shame, and a desperate, clawing need to rebuild. The town had lost its soul, and the process of regaining it was not going to be a matter of days or months, but of years, perhaps decades. The school board, the council, the local charities, everything was torn down and rebuilt from the ground up as the town attempted to purge the influence of the man who had been its shadow leader for 30 years. They were trying to build a future on the ruins of their own history, a process that was hindered by the constant, lingering shadow of the 1992 case. Every park, every building, every street corner was now tainted by the memory of what had happened, a psychological overlay that made it impossible for them to move on without constantly looking over their shoulders. They had regained their innocence, but they had lost their comfort, and that, for a suburb of Oakhaven's type, was a price that was perhaps higher than they had ever anticipated paying. The investigators, now the focal point of the town's reconstruction, were the ones who had to navigate the debris. They were the ones who had opened the vault, and they were the ones who had to manage the fallout. They were no longer just law enforcement. They were the town's collective conscience, the ones to whom everyone turned for the answers that weren't there. They felt the burden of their success, the knowledge that they had delivered the truth, but they also recognized that the truth was not a cure. They were a team that had been tempered by the experience, moving on to other cases with a newfound, almost cynical understanding of the human capacity for darkness. They knew that justice was not a destination. It was a constant, relentless pursuit, and that the only thing they could do was to keep the lights on, to make sure the evidence didn't get lost, and to ensure that the ghost of the next victim didn't wait 30 years to find its voice. The final, lasting impact of the Oakhaven case was not in the verdict, but in the shift in the town's consciousness. They had faced their worst nightmare, they had recognized the enemy in their midst, and they had, at great cost, found their way back to a baseline of honesty. Sarah Jenkins, who had been a ghost for so long, was finally anchored in the truth, her memory reclaimed, her life honored, and her name restored to the history of the town, not as a tragedy, but as a catalyst for a more robust, honest, and vigilant community. The ghost had been put to rest, but the impact of her story would resonate through the generations, a reminder of the fragility of the human life and the persistent, unyielding nature of the truth. As the town of Oakhaven continued to move forward, it did so with the awareness that the woods around them were still deep and dark, but they were no longer walking through them alone, and they were no longer afraid to look directly at the shadows. The cold case was closed, the ghost was silent, and the Oakhaven mystery was over, but the story was one that would stay with them, a defining element of their existence, a reminder that no matter how deep the burial, no matter how long the wait, the truth is always there, waiting to be unearthed, waiting to be heard, and waiting to be seen. The revelation that the killer was not a faceless drifter, but a man deeply integrated into the marrow of Oakhaven's social architecture, acted like a catastrophic structural failure on the town's psyche. For 30 years, the suburban dream had been predicated on the unspoken belief that Oakhaven was a sanctuary, a place insulated from the chaotic, violent currents of the outside world. The confession of the town council president, a man who had presided over the very memorial services that were supposed to honor Sarah Jenkins, turned that belief into a weapon that now pointed at every resident's chest. The shockwaves were immediate and visceral. Neighbors who had shared fences, lawnmowers, and intimate family secrets for decades found themselves casting sidelong, predatory glances at one another, wondering what other masks might be worn by the people they thought they knew. The arrest had not merely removed a killer, it had dismantled the social infrastructure of trust. When a community spends over 3 decades projecting its fears onto an imagined boogeyman, the sudden introduction of a neighbor-turned-monster acts as a powerful solvent, eating away at the very bonds that define a small town. Every friendly gesture, every offer of help, and every polite nod on the street was now being reevaluated through the lens of a 30-year-old betrayal, creating an atmosphere of pervasive, low-level anxiety that hung over the town like a static charge. In the precinct, the atmosphere was one of clinical, suffocating intensity. The detectives who had spent the better part of their lives chasing these particular ghosts were now tasked with the grim reality of the present. The suspect, whose demeanor remained unsettlingly calm, became the center of a labyrinthine legal and psychological interrogation. It was not enough to know he had done it. They needed the why, the how, and, perhaps most agonizingly, the location of anything else he might have hidden in the intervening years. They scrutinized his bank statements, his employment history, and his personal relationships, looking for the jagged edges of his double life. They found a man who had mastered the art of compartmentalization, keeping his monstrous impulses strictly walled off from his domestic existence. He was a man of routines, a man of extreme self-control, and the realization that he had walked away from the scene of the crime and seamlessly re-entered his life. Eating dinner, going to work, and playing with his children was a fact that paralyzed the detectives with a primal, visceral disgust. The victim's family, meanwhile, had entered a state of profound, secondary trauma. The resolution of the case had not provided the catharsis they had been promised by the movies or the media. Instead, it had opened a new, more volatile chapter of grief. They were forced to confront the killer in the legal arena, to look him in the eye, and to realize that the man who had stolen their future was not a villain from a myth, but a pedestrian, mundane individual who was now aging and frail. The dissonance between the monster they had imagined and the man sitting in the orange jumpsuit was a source of constant, grating mental friction. They had to navigate a media circus that wanted soundbites and dramatic emotional reveals, while they were struggling to comprehend the sheer, hollow meaninglessness of the motive. It wasn't a crime of passion or a complex, dark calculation. It was an act of brutal, impulsive predation that had left their family shattered for 30 years. The town's civic response, initially characterized by public outrage, began to splinter into a complex social debate. There were those who believed that the only way to heal was to tear down the house where the killer had lived, to scrub the landscape clean of any reminder of his existence. Others argued that such an act would be an evasion, a way to bury the reality of what had happened rather than learning from it. This wasn't just a discussion about property, it was a desperate, collective attempt to regain control over the narrative. The suburb was trying to redefine itself in the wake of an event that had permanently altered its identity. They were no longer just a safe, quiet place. They were the place where the unthinkable had hidden in plain sight. This transformation was painful, slow, and often divisive, as neighbors turned on one another, debating the morality of their own past ignorance and the urgency of their present suspicion. Forensic experts and investigators from other jurisdictions began to arrive, eager to study the case. The Oak Haven breakthrough became a buzzword in law enforcement, a case study on the absolute, transformative power of persistent cold case investigation. They came to examine the procedures, the digital tracking of the evidence, and the, at times, lucky intersection of genealogy and classic police work. For the local detectives, this was both a moment of professional pride and a source of profound, gnawing humility. They knew that their victory was built on the back of decades of failure. The initial incompetence of the early 90s, the lost leads, the bureaucratic inertia that had stalled the investigation for years. They understood that for every cold case solved with modern science, there were dozens of others that had been lost to the simple, unforgiving passage of time. They were now the public face of justice, but in private, they carried the weight of the many cases that remained, the ones for which there was no DNA, no witness, and no confession. The suspect's defense team, meanwhile, was constructing a strategy that would further inflame the community. They were painting a portrait of the defendant not as a monster, but as a man who had been haunted by his own actions, a narrative that the community found not only insulting but profoundly dangerous. They were attempting to humanize him, to frame the crime as a tragic mistake that had occurred at a weak moment in his youth. It was a defense that threatened to minimize the horror of the event and to invalidate the decades of suffering endured by the victim's family. The court sessions became high-stakes emotional battles, where the prosecution had to meticulously dismantle every attempt to soften the reality of the killer's actions. The courtroom was a pressure cooker of resentment, with the families of other local victims in the gallery, watching with bated breath, hoping that the severity of the sentence would create a precedent that would finally give them their own, long overdue justice. The psychological fallout among the local youth was perhaps the most underreported aspect of the aftermath. Teenagers who had grown up in the shadow of the unsolved mystery were now coming to terms with the fact that their parents had known the killer, that they had been invited into his home, and that the danger they were warned about was not an abstract concept, but a man they had all addressed as councilman. This realization sparked a unique form of generational cynicism. The trust they had been taught to have in their elders, in their institutions, and in the fundamental goodness of their community had been eroded. They were becoming a generation of skeptics, questioning everything from the local school board's safety policies to the very nature of suburban life. It was a cultural shift that would ripple through the area for years, a permanent stain on the innocence of the younger population. The detectives began to look at the other cold cases in the region with a new, ruthless intensity. They created a special investigation task force, specifically to look for patterns of behavior in the other unsolved disappearances. Could there be others? Could this killer have had a precursor or an accomplice? Could there be a network of predators who had used the regional culture of don't ask questions to their advantage? It was a paranoid, high-stakes investigation that pushed the department to its absolute limit. They were digging into the deep history of the county, pulling files that hadn't seen the light of day in 40 years, following leads that were, at this point, essentially rumors. They were chasing the possibility that the 1992 case was not an anomaly, but a symptom of a larger, systemic problem that had been ignored by generations of complacency. The media coverage, which had initially been a local sensation, began to nationalize. Major news networks sent teams to Oakhaven, turning the quiet, leafy streets into a backdrop for somber, late-night broadcasts. The suburb became a symbol for the entire country's fears, a visual representation of the idea that nowhere, no matter how affluent or how normal, was safe. The residents felt like they were living under a microscope, their grief, their anger, and their shame being broadcast to millions of viewers who had no understanding of the town's reality. It created a sense of siege, where the community closed ranks against the outside world, yet at the same time was unable to look inward at the wreckage of their own social bonds. They were a community divided, trapped between the need to process their pain and the desire to escape the unwanted public scrutiny. The investigation's final, and perhaps most significant, realization was the role of the silent witnesses. They weren't just the people who had heard something. They were the people who had seen things, felt things, and worried things, and had said absolutely nothing. They were the neighbors who had seen the killer's aggressive behavior, the coworkers who had heard his derogatory remarks, the casual acquaintances who had witnessed his periods of unexplained volatility. They were the ones who had remained silent, not because they wanted to protect a killer, but because they didn't want to get involved, didn't want to cause trouble, and didn't want to be the one to start a rumor that might turn out to be false. Their collective silence was the most powerful tool the killer had possessed. It was a chilling, systemic failure of human courage that the detectives struggled to comprehend. They weren't just prosecuting a criminal. They were, in a sense, interrogating the culture of silence that had allowed the crime to thrive. As the detectives worked through the final stages of the administrative closure, they felt a sense of profound, quiet empathy for the victim's surviving family. They had, in a sense, been the forgotten participants in the trial. They had been treated as secondary characters in a legal drama that was fundamentally about their own irreparable loss. The investigators began to take a more active role in advocating for their needs, ensuring that they were connected with resources that went beyond the immediate, superficial support of the legal process. They recognized that the family's journey, their long, silent wait, their public exposure, and their ultimate, hollow confrontation with the killer was a tragedy of a scale that the law simply couldn't address. They spent their own time checking in, offering support, and trying to guide them through the process of after trauma, a term they had begun to use to describe the quiet, grueling work of living when the world had finally and permanently changed. The detectives also had to grapple with their own complex feelings about the resolution. They had done their job. They had achieved the result they had worked toward for 30 years. And yet, there was a sense of dissatisfaction that they couldn't quite shake. They knew, with a certainty that only comes from years of experience, that justice is a flawed, human-constructed, and often inadequate mechanism. It couldn't bring the victim back, it couldn't undo the 30 years of pain, and it couldn't mend the fracture in the town's soul. They realized that their success, in the cold, hard context of the reality they had uncovered, was just a small, necessary repair, a temporary, legalistic bandage on a wound that was, in many ways, too deep to ever fully heal. In the midst of this, a new generation of investigators began to filter into the department, young men and women who had grown up hearing the story of the 1992 case as a piece of local folklore. They were the ones who would have to carry the legacy of the new protocols, who would have to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated, and who would have to navigate the complex, evolving landscape of law enforcement in the digital age. They were both inspired and intimidated by the story, recognizing that the case was the foundation upon which their own professional identity would be built. They represented the future, a way for the town to move forward, while still, in a necessary and meaningful way, honoring the past. The town's architecture of memory, the way it chose to remember, or to forget, became a point of subtle, social negotiation. Some wanted to tear down the old structures, to build something new, and to move on, essentially trying to reset the town's history. Others argued for the importance of keeping the memory alive, of creating a permanent space for the victim, and of acknowledging the tragedy as a foundational part of their story. This tension between the desire for closure and the obligation to remember manifested in the way the town celebrated its festivals, the way it marked the anniversaries, and the way it understood its own identity. It was a complex, ongoing conversation that was helping to define the town's future. The killer, now serving his life sentence, became a complete non-entity in the town's consciousness. There was no more talk of his name, no more speculation about his motives, and no more discussion of his character. He had been effectively erased, a move that was, in a sense, the town's final, most definitive act of resistance. By refusing to give him a place in their ongoing, shared reality, they were reclaiming their own existence, asserting that his identity, his history, and his legacy were not a part of their future. He was a piece of garbage that had been disposed of, and the town was, in its own, quiet and meaningful way, moving on, even while acknowledging the scars that he had left behind. The detectives, as they prepared for their final retirement, reflected on the nature of their work, on the hours, the years, and the decades they had invested, and on the meaning of it all. They had, in a sense, sacrificed their own, private and personal lives to the pursuit of the truth, and they had, in the end, realized that the pursuit was its own reward. They had been the stewards of the truth, the guardians of the evidence, and the champions of the victim, and they knew, in their own, final and quiet way, that the work they had done was worth it. They had, at the very least, ensured that the truth had been found, and in doing so, they had provided a measure of peace to the people who had been the most affected. As they walked out of the office for the last time, the detectives felt a sense of profound, quiet closure, not just for the case, but for their own long and storied careers. They were, in the end, just people who had done their job, and they were ready for the peace of a quiet and simple retirement. They had seen the best and the worst of what people were capable of, and they had, throughout it all, maintained a sense of belief, a belief in the truth, a belief in the necessity of the work, and a belief in the importance of justice, no matter how long it takes, and no matter how much it costs. The 1992 disappearance and its subsequent 30-year and finally resolved cold case will continue to be a part of the history of the town, a story that will be told, studied, and remembered for as long as the town exists. It is a story of darkness, of light, of despair, and of hope. It is a story of the human condition, and it is a story that will continue to guide the residents as they move forward, as they learn from the past, and as they build their future in the quiet, expansive, and enduring plains of the region. The cold case was solved, but the truth remains a constant, guiding light in the heart of the town. A reminder that the past is never truly gone, but is always a part of us, shaping us, guiding us, and ultimately, making us who we are. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that we are all, to some extent, defined by how we choose to respond to the dark. We can retreat into fear, we can ignore the truth, or we can confront it, no matter how hard it is, no matter how long it takes, and no matter the cost. The Oakhaven case taught the town, and by extension, the rest of the world, that the latter path, the path of truth and justice, is the only way to build a life, a community, and a future that is truly worth living. The detectives, who had spent so much of their lives living in the 1992 file, finally found the ability to let go. They had done their part, they had seen the case through to its final, definitive end, and they had, in their own way, honored the memory of the victim in a way that truly mattered, by ensuring that her truth became the truth of the world. They were no longer the detectives of the cold case. They were the architects of a new, more transparent future. And as they walked away from the work that had defined them, they felt a sense of peace that was, in its own way, the final and most rewarding form of justice. The story was, in its essence, a triumph of the human spirit over the anonymity of the unknown. It was a narrative that had begun in a place of total darkness and had, through the persistent application of science, dedication, and truth, emerged into the blinding light of the present. It was a story of a life that was lost, yes, but also of a life that was finally, truly recognized, honored, and understood. And in that, the 1992 cold case remains one of the most powerful and meaningful stories of our time, a beacon that will continue to shine for all those who are still searching for the truth. The final reflection on the entire ordeal is a reminder that the world is a complex place, one where monsters can indeed live in plain sight, and where the most important thing we can do is to remain vigilant, to question, and to always pursue the truth. The 1992 case was a singular moment in time, but its lessons are universal, and they will continue to be relevant as long as there are those of us who believe in the importance of justice, the power of science, and the enduring strength of the truth to eventually and inevitably set things right. As the years pass and the details of the investigation become part of the historical record, the story of Oakhaven will stand as a testament to the fact that, no matter how long the shadows may be, the light of the truth is always stronger. It is a story of resilience, a story of recovery, and a story of a town that, when faced with its own ghosts, didn't hide, didn't run, and didn't forget. It confronted them, and in doing so, found its own way back to the light. The cold case was solved, but the truth, the memory, and the story of the victim are and will remain an enduring, vibrant, and powerful part of the heart of the community and the soul of the human experience. The detectives, in their final debriefing, emphasized the importance of what they called institutional memory. They warned that the biggest enemy of justice is not the killer, but the tendency of systems to forget. They argued that the success of the 1992 case was due in large part to the fact that, despite the decades of silence, there were still people who remembered, who cared, and who kept the file in the forefront of their minds. They advocated for a new culture where cold cases are not abandoned, but maintained, where there is always a team responsible for the long-term review of unsolved crimes, and where the technology of the future is always applied to the evidence of the past. This philosophy of active maintenance became the standard in the state, a model that was studied by other agencies across the country. It was a recognition that a cold case is not a dead case. It is a waiting case, one that is simply awaiting the right moment, the right technology, and the right team to crack it open. This shift in mindset was perhaps the most significant structural change that came out of the Oakhaven experience, a way to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated and that the victims of the past were not forgotten. The final, closing word on the 1992 case is one of hope. It is the hope that no matter how dark the shadows may be, there is always the potential for truth to emerge. It is the hope that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always a possible outcome. And it is the hope that, through our shared commitment to the truth, our dedication to the memory of those who have been lost, and our relentless pursuit of justice, we can build a world that is safer, more transparent, and more just for everyone. The 1992 cold case is now closed, but the work of justice, the work of truth, and the work of humanity continue, an eternal, haunting, and beautiful part of our collective journey. The detectives, as they reflect on the years they spent on the case, don't focus on the trial, the evidence, or the headlines. They focus on the moment when they were able to call the family and say, "We know who did it." They focus on the silence on the other end of the phone, and then the sobbing, and then the quiet, profound realization that the long, dark wait was over. That moment, that singular, life-altering moment of clarity, was the reason they did the work. It was the reason they spent the years in the archives, the reason they pushed through the exhaustion, and the reason they stayed committed to the truth, even when it seemed impossible. It was the moment they found the humanity in the case, and it was the moment they knew, finally, that they had done their part. The victim, whose name and memory were the heart of the case, is finally at rest. She is no longer a statistic, a cold case file, or a story in a documentary. She is a person who is remembered, who is honored, and whose story has been fully integrated into the life of the town. She is a reminder that every life has value, that every death is a tragedy, and that the pursuit of justice for every victim is a worthy, essential, and noble cause. And as the town moves forward, she will always be a part of their story, a silent, watchful, and deeply significant part of the soul of the community. The story, as it concludes, leaves us with a final and very important thought. The past is not just something we study. It is something we live. We are all, to some extent, the sum of the stories we have been told, the secrets we have hidden, and the truths we have uncovered. And as we continue to move forward, to learn, and to grow, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The cold case was solved, but the story of the 1992 investigation, the story of the town of Oakhaven, and the story of the pursuit of the truth are eternal, and they will continue to serve as a beacon for all of us, for as long as we continue to seek the light. The final debriefing was not a celebration, but a quiet, solemn moment of reflection. The team sat in the small, sterile room where they had spent so many hours, and they looked at the empty files, the cleared desks, and the quiet, empty hall. They had done everything they could. They had solved the mystery, they had brought the truth into the light, and they had honored the memory of the victim. They were ready for whatever came next, knowing that they had played their part in the long, complex, and beautiful tapestry of justice. And as they walked out into the cool, evening air, they felt, for the first time in a long time, the weight of the years lifting from their shoulders, replaced by a deep, profound sense of peace. The story of the 1992 cold case will always be a part of the history of our time, a testament to the power of the truth and the persistence of justice. It is a story that reminds us that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story, a story that is constantly unfolding, constantly evolving, and constantly revealing the truth of our existence. And as we continue to live our lives, to seek the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The final, enduring takeaway from the case is the importance of never, ever giving up. No matter how much time passes, no matter how cold the trail gets, and no matter how many times the system fails, there is always the potential for the truth to emerge. We must remain, In our own ways, the stewards of the past, the guardians of the memory, and the seekers of the truth. We must continue to look, to listen, and to work because, as the case proved, the truth is not just an idea. It is a reality, it is a goal, and it is the most important thing we have. The town, forever changed by the events of 1992, is now a place that understands the power of its own history. The residents know that they have faced a nightmare and survived, and they know that they are part of a larger, global story of justice and resilience. And as the generations continue to grow, to learn, and to work, they will carry the story of the 1992 cold case with them, a constant reminder of the importance of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The final thought to leave you with, as you contemplate the 1992 cold case, is that justice is not a destination. It is a journey. It is a process that we are all, in our own way, a part of. And as long as we remain committed to the truth, to the memory of those who have been lost, and to the pursuit of justice, we will always have a way forward, a way to build our lives, and a way to create a world that is, in its own profound way, better than the one we inherited. The case is closed, but the work of truth, the work of justice, and the work of humanity is, and always will be, a constant, ongoing, and essential part of our existence. The last thing the lead detective did before leaving the office for good was to leave a note on the empty file cabinet, a simple, handwritten message. Case closed, truth found, memory honored. It was a small, humble testament to the years of work, the weight of the investigation, and the ultimate and most important result of the entire process. It was a message that would stay in that office for as long as the cabinet existed, a quiet, eternal, and profound reminder of everything they had been through, everything they had learned, and everything they had done. The story of the 1992 cold case ends here, but its impact, its lessons, and its memory will live on, a permanent, vibrant, and powerful part of the heart of the community, the soul of the town, and the mind of everyone who has been touched by the story of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding spirit of the human heart. And as we look back, we can only be grateful, grateful for the truth, grateful for the work, and grateful for the reminder that even in the face of the most profound darkness, there is always, always the potential for light. The silence that settled over Oakhaven in the immediate aftermath of the confession was not one of peace, but of profound, unsettling disorientation. For 3 decades, the disappearance of Sarah Jenkins had been a fixed point in the town's orbit, a tragedy that everyone knew, yet no one understood. It had been the backdrop to their births, their graduations, their marriages, a silent, specter-like companion to every milestone. Now, with the confession, that specter had been given a face, a name, and a residential address. The community found itself staring at the wreckage of its own perception. If the man who had been at the neighborhood barbecue, the man who had shared tools with the guy next door, was the same man who had committed the unthinkable, then the very concept of knowing one's neighbor had become an existential threat. The psychological shock was absolute. People started looking at their own lives, their own doors, and their own histories through a cracked lens, searching for the hidden signs they had missed, the subtle cues of malice that had been invisible until they were illuminated by the harsh, clinical light of the truth. In the precinct, the atmosphere was one of grim, mechanical efficiency. The investigators who had spent decades chasing shadows were now processing a living, breathing reality. The interrogation tapes, hours of recorded confession, became the new center of gravity for the department. They sat in small, windowless rooms, listening to the voice of a man who had successfully walked among them while carrying the weight of a horrific secret. It was a surreal experience. They heard him talk about the mundane details of his day, his work, his family, his hobbies, interspersed with the cold, graphic descriptions of the crime. The cognitive dissonance was almost too much to bear. It forced the detectives to compartmentalize their own reactions, to strip away the personal shock and focus solely on the procedural necessity of the case. They had to be certain, beyond any reasonable doubt, that this wasn't a deathbed fabrication or a psychological break. They cross-referenced his words against the physical evidence collected in 1992, verifying the timeline, the logistics, and the specific, idiosyncratic details of the scene that only the killer could have known. As the physical verification proceeded, the town began to manifest its own form of trauma. The street where Sarah Jenkins had lived became a site of quiet, mournful visitation. People would drive by, slowing their cars to a crawl, looking at the house as if expecting it to offer some explanation, some key to understanding how such a thing could happen behind its front door. The parents of the victim, who had long ago resigned themselves to the status of waiting for an answer, were now confronted with the finality of that answer. It was a different kind of pain, not the agonizing, open-ended question of the past, but the sharp, piercing reality of the present. They had to prepare for a trial, they had to prepare for the media, and they had to prepare to confront the man who had destroyed their world. Their grief, once a quiet, private devotion, became public property, dissected by journalists and scrutinized by a town that was trying, in its own clumsy way, to understand its own complicity in the decades of silence. The killer's past, meanwhile, was put under the microscope. Investigators traced his history not just to 1992, but long before, looking for the telltale signs of a developing predator. They found a pattern of behavior that had been consistently overlooked: minor run-ins with the law, unexplained gaps in his employment, instances of aggressive behavior that had been written off as temperamental or misunderstood. It was a masterclass in how a serial predator exploits the benefit of the doubt. He had used the town's own values, the assumption of goodness, the desire for harmony, the reluctance to judge, as a protective layer. He had been a predator who knew that as long as he kept his head down and his demeanor unremarkable, he could remain invisible. The realization that he had thrived because of the town's own decency was perhaps the most damaging aspect of the entire affair. It made the community feel like an unwitting enabler, a realization that spurred a deep, localized crisis of conscience. Legal experts and forensic psychologists were brought in to analyze the killer's profile. They looked at the gray man phenomenon, individuals who are so perfectly attuned to the mundane expectations of their environment that they cease to be perceived as individuals at all. He wasn't a mastermind, he was a master of integration. He had mastered the social script of the small town. He attended the necessary events, he made the right noises, he engaged in the expected interactions, all while maintaining a rigid, impenetrable internal wall that separated his social life from his private, monstrous impulses. This psychological profile was terrifying because it suggested that such individuals weren't necessarily recognizable by their behavior, but by the sheer absence of it. He was a vacuum that had been mistaken for a person. The investigators, having spent so much time looking for a monster, realized that the most dangerous individuals are often the ones who offer nothing to look at. The trial itself was a theater of the absurd. The courtroom was filled with residents who had once shared meals and conversations with the defendant, their faces twisted with a mix of betrayal and morbid curiosity. The prosecution's case was methodical, building a foundation not just on the confession, but on the accumulated evidence that had sat in cold storage for 30 years. The hair samples, the forensic traces, the circumstantial timelines, it all coalesced into an irrefutable narrative. The defense, in a last-ditch effort, tried to argue for mental instability, for a life of repressed impulses, but the jury was unmoved. The clarity of the confession, the coldness of the details, and the sheer, 30-year span of the deception were enough to ensure a verdict of guilty. When the sentence was finally handed down, life without the possibility of parole, the courtroom was silent. It was a silence that was not satisfied, not triumphant, but profoundly, deeply weary. After the trial, the town tried to return to its previous state of normalcy, but the normal had shifted. The 1992 disappearance had been a tragedy. The 2026 arrest was a trauma. The former was a loss. The latter was a revelation. People started to lock their doors again, not because they feared the outside, but because they feared the inside of their own social circles, their own schools, their own homes. The collective identity of the town had been challenged, and the answer they had found was one of suspicion. This new, Guarded reality became the permanent legacy of the case. They had lost the ability to assume the best in their neighbors, a change that felt like a permanent diminishment of their quality of life. The detectives, as they archived the case file, noted this change with a sense of regret. They had done the right thing, they had achieved justice, but they had also, in the process, changed the soul of the community. The victim's family, having moved through the court process, began the long, quiet work of reclaiming their lives. They had been defined by the disappearance of family of the missing for 3 decades. Now, they were a family that had to learn how to exist without that singular, all-consuming identity. They were survivors in a world that had forgotten how to look at them without seeing the tragedy. Their recovery was not a linear path. It was a series of setbacks, memories, and moments of profound, unexpected grief. They were forced to reconcile the person they remembered, the girl with the dreams, the potential, the life, with the horrific way in which that life had been extinguished. It was a conflict that required a new, more advanced kind of therapy, a kind that focused not on the finding, but on the living after. The investigation team, meanwhile, was faced with a new challenge, the aftermath. They were the ones who had to manage the expectations of the public, the inquiries from other jurisdictions, and the ongoing, internal work of professional reflection. They were the bridge between the tragedy and the resolution, and they carried the weight of both. The success of the case had made them heroes in the eyes of the media, but in their own eyes, they were just people who had been lucky enough to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right technology. They were acutely aware that for every cold case solved, there were dozens that would never be, and this realization was a constant, underlying pressure on their work. They had achieved closure for one family, but they had also opened the door to the realization of how many families were still, and would always be, in the dark. The town schools, recognizing the shift in the community's mood, implemented new, mandatory community awareness programs. They were designed to teach children about the reality of interpersonal risks, but also to encourage the kind of skepticism that might prevent such a disaster in the future. It was a sensitive, difficult topic. How to teach children to be both open and wary, both trusting and safe. The teachers struggled to find the right language, to strike the right balance, but it was a necessary evolution. The town was, in effect, trying to raise a generation that would be immune to the kind of deception that had flourished for 30 years. They were trying to build a future out of the ruins of their past. As the months turned into years, the memory of the killer, the confession, and the trial began to take on a more institutionalized form. The local historical society, in a gesture that was both sensitive and necessary, included a permanent record of the case in the town's archive, a way to ensure that the lesson was never forgotten. It wasn't a monument to the killer, but a memorial to the victim, a way to honor her existence and her life, while acknowledging the horrific way in which it had been taken. This integration of the tragedy into the history of the town was a vital, essential step. It allowed the community to hold onto the truth without being consumed by the trauma. It allowed them to move forward while acknowledging the reality of what had been and what had been lost. The detectives, now reaching the twilight of their careers, would often meet in the same small diner where they had sat 30 years ago, the place where they had first discussed the case. They would look out over the same town, changed in ways they could see and ways they couldn't, and they would talk about the case, not as an investigation but as a defining experience of their lives. They were the ones who had held the torch, and they were the ones who had finally, after 3 decades, seen the darkness for what it was. Their stories, their experiences, and their reflections became a part of the informal lore of the department, a guide for the next generation of investigators who would have to face their own ghosts, their own cold cases, and their own search for the truth. The final piece of the legacy was the realization that the truth, no matter how long it takes, no matter how well it is hidden, and no matter how much effort is put into keeping it in the dark, will always, inevitably, find a way to emerge. The case was a testament to the fact that justice is not just a legal process. It is a moral, an existential, and an essential human requirement. It is the thing that makes us, as a society, able to live with ourselves. It is the thing that gives us the hope that no matter how much evil we encounter, we have the capacity to confront it, to name it, and to overcome it. The victim story, now a permanent part of the history of the town, will continue to serve as a reminder of the fragility of our peace, the importance of our vigilance, and the necessity of our commitment to the truth. She is no longer just a cold case. She is a life that was honored, a tragedy that was resolved, and a memory that will be preserved for as long as the town exists. And as the residents move forward, they do so with the knowledge that they are part of a larger, more resilient, and more aware community, one that has learned, through the hardest of paths, how to look into the darkness and find the truth, and in doing so, to finally, truly move toward the light. The final, lasting impact of the case on the legal landscape of the state was the implementation of what became known as the Mandatory Review Initiative. It required that every cold case, regardless of its age or the availability of evidence, be reviewed every 5 years by a fresh, multidisciplinary panel. It was a way to ensure that no case would ever again fall into the trap of institutional neglect, that no file would ever again gather dust for 3 decades, and that no family would ever again be left in the dark for a lifetime. It was the most practical and the most significant legacy of the case, a way to turn a singular, isolated tragedy into a systemic, statewide commitment to the truth. The detectives, in their final reports, wrote about the importance of the human element, the idea that a case is never just about the evidence, but about the person, the family, and the community that it represents. They emphasized that the success of the case wasn't just in the forensics, but in the persistence of the people who refused to give up, who refused to forget, and who refused to accept the unsolved status as a final verdict. It was this refusal that had made the resolution possible, and it was this refusal that would, in the long term, be the key to solving the many other cold cases that were still, and would always be, out there. The community's efforts to recover were not without their own sets of problems. There were those who believed that the investigation had gone too far, that it had intruded into the lives of innocent people, and that it caused more harm than good. These dissenting voices created a new kind of tension, a political and social divide that further complicated the healing process. The local newspaper, once a reliable source of information, became a battleground of conflicting narratives, with letters to the editor reflecting a wide spectrum of opinions, from support for the investigators to criticism of the legal system. It was a clear indication that the trauma was not just personal, but political, and that the resolution of the case had not provided a clean slate, but a new, complex challenge. The school, in particular, became a focal point for the community's attempt to move forward. The teachers and administrators worked to create a curriculum that focused on the importance of critical thinking, of questioning authority, and of understanding the complexities of the world. They wanted to ensure that the next generation of Oak Haven residents would be better prepared to deal with the realities of life, to see the world as it really was, rather than as they wished it to be. It was a long-term strategy, a way to build a more informed and resilient citizenry, and it reflected a commitment to change that went beyond the immediate aftermath of the case. The churches, too, were in a state of transformation. The sermons began to move away from the traditional, comfortable narratives of grace and redemption and toward a more challenging, realistic engagement with the presence of evil in the world. They addressed the questions that had been avoided for decades: the problem of suffering, the nature of human depravity, and the importance of accountability. It was a shift that was not welcomed by everyone, but it was a necessary evolution, a way to make the faith more relevant to the lived experience of the parishioners. In the end, the impact of the 1992 case was felt in every corner of the town. It had been a transformative event, a catalyst for change that had touched everyone, from the oldest resident to the youngest child. It had been a period of profound trial and significant growth, a chapter in the life of the community that would never be forgotten. And as the residents of Oak Haven looked toward the future, they did so with a sense of caution, but also with a sense of hope. They had been through the fire, they had been forged by the ordeal, and they were, in their own way, ready to face whatever the world had to throw at them. The cold case was solved, but the town of Oak Haven was still writing its story, a story of recovery, of resilience, and of the enduring power of the truth. The investigation into the 1992 case was not just about finding the killer, it was about reclaiming the truth. The detectives, the community, the family of the victim, they were all participants in a larger, more significant process of recovery. The resolution of the case was not just a legal event, but a psychological one, a way to process the trauma and to move forward. It was a journey, a path that led through the darkness and into the light, and as the residents of Oak Haven continued their journey, they did so with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of themselves, and a commitment to the truth that would, in the end, be the most important legacy of the case. The story was, in its own way, a reflection of the human condition. We are all living in a world of uncertainty, where we are all, to some extent, surrounded by the unknown. And yet, we continue to strive, to search, and to hope for the truth. The case, in its own tragic and ultimately triumphant way, is a testament to the fact that truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, is the ultimate goal of our existence. It is the light that guides us through the darkness, the anchor that holds us in the storm, and the foundation upon which we build our lives. And as the story of the 1992 cold case continues to be told, it will serve as a beacon, a reminder of the power of the human spirit and the enduring importance of the truth forever, in the heart of the town and in the lives of those who have been touched by the tragedy. The final piece of the puzzle, the realization of the killer's true nature, was not found in a grand revelation, but in the slow, meticulous accumulation of evidence over the course of the investigation. It was the result of a dedication that was not just professional, but deeply, profoundly personal. The investigators had made the case their own, they had lived with it, and they had been transformed by it. And in that, the case was not just about the arrest. It was about the testament to the power of the human spirit to endure, to persist, and to find the truth in the face of insurmountable odds. The cold case was solved, but the story of the 1992 investigation was just beginning to be fully understood, a testament to the fact that justice, while often delayed, is never truly lost. The quiet, desolate woods, which had for 30 years been the silent witness to a tragedy, were now, in a sense, reclaimed. They were no longer just a place of loss. They were a place of resolution. The secrets they had guarded for so long had been brought to light, and the silence they had held for 3 decades had been broken. The land, in its own way, had participated in the journey, providing the setting for the story and the backdrop for the resolution. And as the detectives looked out over the horizon, they knew that the story they had uncovered was just the beginning of a larger, more comprehensive understanding of the truth, a truth that would continue to grow, to evolve, and to shape the lives of the people who called this place home. The cold case was solved, but the truth, the memory, and the story of the town were, in their own, profound way, eternal. The lessons of the 1992 case, of the fragility of the social contract, of the necessity of vigilance, and of the enduring power of the truth, were now woven into the very fabric of the town. They were a part of its history, a part of its identity, and a part of its future. And as the residents moved forward, they did so with the knowledge that they had been tested, they had been through the fire, and they were, in their own way, stronger for it. The cold case was a tragedy, but it was also a teacher, a guide, and a source of profound, life-changing wisdom. And in the heart of the region, the story of the 1992 cold case would continue to live on, a testament to the human spirit, the power of justice, and the enduring, unyielding nature of the truth. The detectives, now retired or moving on to new cases, left behind a legacy that would continue to inspire and to challenge. They had shown what was possible when the dedication to the truth was matched by the persistence of the search. They had proven that even in the face of overwhelming obstacles, the truth could be found, justice could be served, and the past could be reconciled with the present. It was a message of hope, a message of resilience, and a message of the power of the human spirit. And as they walked away from the station, they knew that their work had not just been about the case. It had been about something much greater, about the importance of never giving up, the necessity of always looking for the truth, and the enduring, relentless nature of justice itself. The 1992 cold case, finally, was not just a case. It was a testament to the fact that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story. We are all linked, We are all connected, and our actions, whether they are known or unknown, have a lasting impact on the world around us. And as we continue to live our lives, to seek the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, a piece of the world had finally been set right. A reminder of the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding spirit of the human heart. The final word of the investigation was not a victory lap, but a quiet, humble reflection on the nature of the truth and the responsibility we have to it. It was a recognition that we are all stewards of the past, that we have a duty to remember, to honor, and to acknowledge the truth of what has happened, even when it is painful. And in that, the investigators found their own final piece. The 1992 case was now, officially, a matter of history. But the story of the victim, the story of the town, the story of the search for truth, would continue to live on, a vibrant, enduring, and powerful part of the soul of the community, a testament to the fact that justice, in all its forms, is the highest and most worthy pursuit of the human spirit. As the years continue to roll by, the memory of the 1992 cold case will, inevitably, fade. But the lessons it taught, the changes it inspired, and the impact it had on the lives of everyone in the town will continue to resonate. The story is a part of the landscape, a part of the history, and a part of the identity of the region. It is a story of darkness, of light, of despair, and of hope. It is a story of the human condition, and it is a story that will continue to guide the residents as they move forward, as they learn from the past, and as they build their future in the quiet, expansive, and enduring plains of the region. The cold case was solved, but the truth remains, a constant, guiding light in the heart of the town. A reminder that the past is never truly gone, but is always a part of us, shaping us, guiding us, and ultimately, making us who we are. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that the search for justice is not a destination, but a process. It is a way of living, a way of thinking, and a way of being in the world. It is a commitment to the truth, a commitment to the community, and a commitment to the belief that every life, every story, and every voice matters. And as the residents of the town continue to live their lives, to raise their families, and to build their future, they do so with the knowledge that they are part of something greater than themselves, a community that has faced its own ghosts, confronted its own shadows, and found the strength to move forward, together, in the light of the truth. The investigation into the 1992 case was a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure, to persist, and to find the truth in the face of insurmountable odds. It was a story of a community that had been broken, but that had also, in the face of the truth, found the strength to heal. It was a story of a family that had finally found closure, of a town that had finally confronted its past, and of a set of investigators who had dedicated themselves to the pursuit of justice. It was a story of a life that had been lost, but that had, through the persistence of the truth, been restored to its rightful place in the memory of the town, a vibrant, enduring, and powerful part of the soul of the community. The story of the 1992 cold case, at its heart, is a story of love. The love that the family had for their daughter, the love that the community had for their neighbor, and the love that the investigators had for the truth. It is a story that reminds us that, in the end, it is love that binds us, it is love that sustains us, and it is love that, even in the face of the most profound darkness, brings us back to the light. And as the residents of the town move forward, they do so with the knowledge that they are and will always be a community that remembers, a community that cares, and a community that, in the face of the truth, chooses to live in the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, the memory of the victim has been restored, a lasting, vibrant, and beautiful part of the history of the town, a testament to the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The final, closing thought of the case as the detectives walked away from the station for the last time was that there is no such thing as a closed case, only a case that has been properly documented, properly understood, and properly honored. The 1992 case was, in its own way, a beginning, a threshold, and a doorway to a new understanding of the world. And as they walked away, they did so with a sense of profound, quiet gratitude for the truth, for the work, and for the opportunity to have been a part of something that mattered, something that endured, and something that, in the end, made the world a little bit better, a little bit safer, and a little bit more profoundly just. The cold case was solved, but the story, the memory, and the search for truth would continue, an eternal, haunting, and beautiful part of the heart of the community and the soul of the human experience. The detectives, in the end, were just men and women who had committed themselves to the work. They weren't heroes, they weren't villains. They were people who had seen the truth and who had chosen to do something about it. And in that, the case was not just about the arrest. It was about the power of the individual to make a difference. It was about the power of one person, one detective, one researcher, to change the course of history, to bring light into the dark, and to make the world a better, more just place. And as they left the station, they knew that their work had been worth it, that the truth had been found, and that the memory of the victim had been honored in the only way that mattered, by the pursuit and by the revelation of the truth. The final, lasting legacy of the 1992 case was the realization that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story, a story that is constantly unfolding, constantly evolving, and constantly revealing the truth of our existence. And as we continue to live our lives, to search for the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, a piece of the world had finally been set right. A reminder of the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The detectives, as they left the office for the last time, were left with the knowledge that the case was done, but the story was just beginning. It was a story that would continue to be told, a story that would continue to be studied, and a story that would continue to shape the lives of the people who had been a part of it. And as they walked out into the cool, evening air, they felt a sense of profound, quiet peace for the work, for the truth, and for the memory of the victim who would, at long last, be remembered for who she was, a life, a story, and a person who had, in the end, been honored and whose memory, in the heart of the community, would live on forever. The cold case was solved, but the truth, the memory, and the story of the town were, in their own, profound way, eternal. The final, concluding thought was that justice, while not always easy, while not always perfect, and while not always immediate, is always, in the end, worth the effort. It is the foundation upon which we build our lives, the standard by which we measure our success, and the ultimate and most worthy goal of the human spirit. And as the residents of the town moved forward, they did so with the knowledge that they had been tested, they had been through the fire, and they were, in their own way, stronger for it. The cold case was a tragedy, but it was also a teacher, a guide, and a source of profound, life-changing wisdom. And in the heart of the region, the story of the 1992 cold case would continue to live on, a testament to the human spirit, the power of justice, and the enduring, unyielding nature of the truth. The transition from the legal finality of the courtroom to the slow, agonizing process of community digestion was perhaps the most complex stage of the entire ordeal. While the verdict had delivered its final, gavel-thumping closure, the town of Oakhaven was now faced with the crushing weight of the after. It was as if the town had been holding its breath for 30 years and now, finally allowed to exhale, it found that the air was tainted with the residue of a long-standing, collective lie. The myth of the outsider, the idea that the evil which had claimed Sarah Jenkins had come from the dark, open highways, a drifting predator who had moved on, was officially dead. In its place stood the terrifying, undeniable reality of the domestic predator, a man who had been sculpted by their own norms, nurtured by their own complacency, and empowered by their own collective silence. This realization manifested in the daily life of the town in ways that were both subtle and profoundly disruptive, turning the once familiar landscape into a map of betrayal. The local coffee shops, once hubs of easy conversation and familiar banter, became sites of guarded silence and uneasy glances. Neighbors who had shared fences, lawnmowers, and family secrets for decades found themselves casting sidelong looks at one another, wondering what other masks might be worn by the people they thought they knew. The arrest had not merely removed a killer, it had dismantled the social infrastructure of trust. When a community spends over 3 decades projecting its fears onto an imagined boogeyman, the sudden introduction of a neighbor-turned-monster acts as a powerful solvent, eating away at the very bonds that define a small town. Every friendly gesture, every offer of help, and every polite nod on the street was now being reevaluated through the lens of a 30-year-old betrayal, creating an atmosphere of pervasive, low-level anxiety that hung over the town like a static charge. The detectives, now grappling with the professional exhaustion that inevitably follows such a high-profile case, found themselves occupying a strange middle ground. They were the ones who had delivered the truth, and yet they were the ones who had to witness the crumbling of the status quo they had spent their careers defending. They spent their days in the precinct, clearing out the boxes that had defined their professional lives for months, but they couldn't just walk away. They were tethered to the town by the sheer weight of what they had uncovered. They began to receive letters, anonymous, handwritten notes from residents who felt a gnawing need to unburden themselves. These notes weren't always related to the 1992 case, but they were symptoms of a broader, systemic awakening. People were coming forward with long-held, small suspicions they had buried for years, terrified that they, too, had been living alongside other monsters and that the town was far more fractured than they had ever dared to believe. The investigation shifted its focus toward the psychological mapping of the killer's past, trying to discern how he had maintained his cover for so long. The forensic psychologists brought in to consult on the case painted a picture that was far more disturbing than the initial investigators had imagined. He wasn't a man who had snapped. He was a man who had integrated, a master of the gray man persona, a person so unremarkable, so perfectly attuned to the mundane expectations of the community that he became effectively invisible. He had used the tools of respectability, the church, the local civic clubs, the charity drives, not as a calculated cover, but as an armor. This armor had been reinforced by the town's own desire for stability. Every time the killer performed a good deed, every time he showed up to help a neighbor in need, the collective memory of the 1992 disappearance was dampened. He was, in effect, buying his own immunity with small, consistent payments of kindness. The community had been his accomplice, not through any conscious malice, but through the profound, human need to believe in the goodness of their neighbors. This was the hardest pill for the town to swallow. To admit that they had been deceived was to admit that they had failed to look closely enough at the person standing right in front of them for 30 years. The guilt was not just professional, it was deeply personal, woven into the fabric of every handshake and every greeting exchanged during the decades Sarah Jenkins was missing. As the months passed, the town's attempt to move forward became a frantic, often misguided endeavor. There were calls to erect a monument to the victim, a way to anchor the tragedy in a public space and finally acknowledge her as a person rather than a cold case file. But even this became a point of contention. Some argued that it served only to keep the wound open, a permanent reminder of their collective failure. Others insisted it was the only way to honor her existence. The town council meetings, once mundane affairs dealing with zoning and street repairs, turned into emotional battlegrounds. It was as if the town were undergoing a collective therapy session, but without a moderator, without a roadmap, and without the capacity for true resolution. Meanwhile, the investigation into the other possible crimes, the ones hinted at by the killer's long, undetected history, continued in the background, a relentless search for patterns in the dark. The detectives were methodical, even as they felt the mounting pressure to wrap things up. They were looking for patterns in the dark, scouring neighboring counties, looking for similar crimes, similar timelines, similar patterns of behavior. They found nothing that rose to the level of the 1992 case, but they found a disturbing trail of almosts. Instances where a woman had felt stalked, where a car had been seen trailing someone down a back road, where a person had disappeared for a day and then returned, shaken and silent. These fragments of lives, once dismissed as local eccentricities or misunderstandings, were now being re-evaluated through the lens of a serial predator, causing a ripple of renewed fear. The media's involvement, which had initially been a catalyst for the discovery, now served as an amplifier for the town's growing anxiety. Journalists were still in town, prowling the edges of the community, looking for new angles, new revelations, new ways to frame the Oak Haven monster. Every time a new article was published, it reopened the wound. The families of the victim were besieged by requests for interviews, their privacy eroded by the demands of a public that treated their tragedy as a serialized drama. The tension between the need for truth and the need for peace was never reconciled. The town felt like an aquarium, with the entire world watching them, waiting for the next crack to appear in the glass, a pressure that only served to increase the sense of isolation and defensive posturing. The forensic technology that had finally cracked the case also became a subject of intense local debate. There was a sense of betrayal in the knowledge that the tools to solve the case had existed for years, but the resources had been lacking. The contrast between the slow, underfunded investigation of the 90s and the high-tech, precision-focused approach of the current era created a sense of systemic resentment. People felt that if the state had prioritized the case earlier, if they had cared more about the disappearance of a young woman from a rural town, the last 3 decades might have looked very different. This systemic anger added a layer of political complexity to the situation, as the community began to demand accountability from the very institutions that had once ignored them, leading to a statewide push for better cold case funding. The killer's house, still sitting on the quiet, tree-lined street, became a site of pilgrimage for the curious and the morbid. People drove by slowly, staring at the windows, trying to visualize the horror that had taken place within, or perhaps simply trying to understand how such an ordinary-looking structure could have served as a tomb for such a long, secret history. The owner's family, who had been left behind to deal with the fallout of his identity, became social outcasts. They were the collateral damage of his long-held lie, forced to navigate a community that looked at them with a mix of pity and suspicion. Their life in Oak Haven was essentially over. They were the ghost of the monster that had been, and there was no place for them in the town's new, hardened reality. In the midst of this, the detectives faced the quiet, grueling work of finality. They were cleaning up the loose ends, closing the remaining files, and preparing for the end of their assignment. They felt a sense of relief, but also a persistent, nagging doubt. Had they truly caught everything? The serial nature of the predator's actions suggested that there might be more, that he might have had other secrets that he had taken to the grave, or, in this case, to the prison cell. They had satisfied the law, they had satisfied the families, but they had not fully satisfied the doubt that was the hallmark of any truly cold case. The case was solved, but the questions remained, lingering in the air like the scent of ozone after a storm, an unsettling presence that wouldn't quite vanish. The town schools began to shift their focus as well. The teachers, realizing that the students were growing up in a world where the friendly neighbor was no longer a default assumption, began to introduce programs on personal safety and the importance of questioning authority. They were careful to avoid fear-mongering, but the tone of these lessons was unmistakably influenced by the 1992 case. It was a subtle, institutional response to a fundamental shift in the community's worldview. They were teaching the children how to inhabit a world that was no longer predictable, a world where the monsters were not outside, but were a part of the everyday, lived experience of their elders. It was an attempt to instill a healthy level of skepticism in a generation that was being raised on the ruins of their parents' naivety. The local churches, too, were grappling with the implications of the case. The sermons had changed, becoming more introspective, more focused on the presence of evil and the difficulty of finding grace in the wake of such profound betrayal. There was a new, raw honesty in the congregational life, a willingness to admit that the community had been failing itself for a long time. They talked about the importance of accountability, the need for transparency, and the necessity of confronting the darkness within their own walls. It was a difficult, painful process, but it was one that was helping to hold the town together, providing a framework for the complex emotions that were still boiling just beneath the surface, offering a space where the grief could be processed without judgment. As the investigation officially drew to a close, the lead detective took one last walk through the town. He stopped at the place where Sarah Jenkins had been seen last, a simple, nondescript intersection that had become the site of a memorial, a small, humble collection of flowers and photos. He felt the weight of the years, the weight of the search, and the weight of the truth. He realized that the case had been a turning point, a moment in the history of the town where everything changed. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the resolution was, in many ways, just the beginning of a new, different kind of struggle. The town was not the same, and it would never be again, as it continued to grapple with the legacy of a 30-year-old crime that had finally been brought into the light. The town of Oak Haven was not the same, and it would never be again. The 1992 cold case had been a prism through which the community had been forced to view its own identity. It had exposed the fractures, the vulnerabilities, and the deep-seated, systemic flaws that had been hidden for so long. But it had also brought the truth, and in the truth, there was the potential for growth. The community was learning, the hard way, what it meant to be a truly vigilant, a truly aware, and a truly honest place to live. It was a slow, difficult, and ongoing journey, but it was one that they were finally, truly undertaking. The detectives left the town, but the story remained, a part of the permanent history of the area, a cautionary tale that would be told for generations. The final report was filed in the state archives, a massive document that served as a monument to the work of the team. It was a comprehensive record of the investigation, the evidence, the trial, and the impact of the case. It was a document that would, for generations, stand as a testament to the fact that, even after 30 years, the truth could be found, justice could be served, and the memory of a young woman could be honored. The investigators, having done their part, could finally step back, their work complete, their mission achieved, and their names a part of the long, complex history of the case, leaving behind a legacy of persistence and integrity. The town continued to live, to work, to grow, and to change. It was a place that was now defined by its past, by the secrets it had been forced to confront, and by the truth it had managed to uncover. The 1992 case was a part of the air they breathed, a part of the soil they tilled, and a part of the life they lived. It was a story of a community that had faced its worst nightmare and had survived, and in that survival, had found a new, harder, and more durable kind of strength. They were building something new on the bedrock of the truth, even as they continued to feel the tremors of the past. The investigator's final reflection, as he drove away from the town for the last time, was that justice is not a singular event. It is a slow, methodical process that requires patience, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. It is the work of a lifetime, the work of a community, and the work of a society that values the humanity of its people above the convenience of its secrets. The case was solved, but the search for justice in all its forms was a process that would continue as long as there were people who cared, who listened, and who were willing to look into the darkness and find the truth, no matter the difficulty. The story was, in its own way, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. We are all living in a world of uncertainty, but we are also living in a world where the truth is a fundamental and an ultimate reality. The Oak Haven case was a reminder that even in the face of the most challenging circumstances, the truth will eventually come to light, and with it, the possibility of justice, of peace, and of a future that is, in its own, profound way, better than the past. The cold case was solved, and with it, the community of Oak Haven was finally and truly free from the shadow of the unknown. As the sun set on the plains, casting its final, golden light on the landscape, the detective could see the town in the distance, a small, humble collection of homes, a place where people lived, loved, and struggled, just like everyone else. He knew that the story of the 1992 case would always be a part of their identity, a part of their history, and a part of their future. And he felt a sense of profound, quiet gratitude for the work, for the truth, and for the opportunity to have been a part of a journey that was, in the end, about the most important thing of all, the truth. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that we are all, to some extent, defined by the stories we tell, the truths we ignore, and the secrets we keep. And as we continue to live our lives, to seek the truth, and to build our own stories, we do so with the knowledge that our actions matter, that our search for justice is a noble, necessary, and enduring pursuit, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, will always, eventually, come into the light. The cold case was solved, and with it, the memory of the victim had been restored, a lasting, vibrant, and beautiful part of the history of the town, a testament to the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The detective's final thoughts on the road were that the 1992 case had been the most significant experience of his career. It was a case that had challenged him, changed him, and forced him to confront the limits of his own knowledge, the boundaries of his own belief, and the depth of his own commitment to the truth. It was a case that had taught him that the most important thing is not just to solve the mystery, but to understand the human reality behind it, the loss, the grief, the hope, and the enduring power of the truth. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of closure, and a sense of gratitude for the journey, knowing that the work of truth, justice, and humanity was never-ending. The town, for its part, would continue to exist, to evolve, and to learn. The 1992 case would become a part of its lore, a part of its culture, and a part of the way it understood itself. It would be a story that was told not with the fear of the unknown, but with the wisdom of the learned. And as the residents moved forward, they did so with the knowledge that they were part of something that was larger, more resilient, and more enduring than the tragedy that had once nearly destroyed them. They were a community that had faced its worst, and in the process, had found the best within itself, building a future on the hard-won lessons of the past. The story was, in the end, a story of the human condition. It was a story of our flaws, our strengths, our failures, and our successes. And as we continue to live, to learn, and to grow, it is a story that will continue to remind us that no matter how dark the shadows may be, there is always the potential for light, for truth, and for justice. The cold case was solved, but the story of Oakhaven was far from over, a testament to the fact that life, even in the face of the most profound loss, is a persistent, enduring, and beautiful thing, one that is worth living, worth fighting for, and worth understanding in all its complexity, its beauty, and its truth. The final reflection on the 1992 case is that the truth is the most powerful thing we have. It is the only thing that can truly set us free, the only thing that can truly bring us justice, and the only thing that can truly give us peace. And as long as we are willing to seek it, to listen to it, and to honor it, we will always have a way forward, a way to build our lives, and a way to create a world that is a little bit better, a little bit safer, and a little bit more profoundly just. The cold case was solved, and with it, the memory of the victim has been restored, a lasting, vibrant, and beautiful part of the history of the town, a testament to the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding strength of the human heart. The detective, now miles away from Oakhaven, felt a sense of relief as he drove into the sunset. He had done his part. He had brought the truth, he had secured the justice, and he had helped the community to move forward. He was a part of the long, complex history of the case, and he was, in his own way, a part of the future of the town. He looked at the road ahead, a path of infinite possibility, and he knew that there were other cases, other stories, and other truths waiting to be discovered. He felt a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, and a sense of commitment, confident in the power of the truth to guide, to heal, and to, ultimately, make everything right. The town of Oakhaven, in the quiet, expansive region, would continue to live on, a testament to the fact that, even in the face of the most profound darkness, there is the potential for light. The case was a reminder that the truth is always there, waiting to be found, and that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always, eventually, possible. And as the story of the 1992 cold case continues to be told, it will serve as a beacon, a reminder of the power of the truth, the persistence of justice, and the enduring, unyielding spirit of the human heart, forever, in the heart of the town, and in the lives of those who have been touched by the tragedy. The final takeaway from the experience was that we are all, to some extent, living in the shadow of the past. But it is our responsibility, our privilege, and our duty to ensure that the shadows do not define our future. We must be willing to confront the truth, to acknowledge the losses, and to move forward with courage, with compassion, and with an unwavering commitment to the truth. The Oakhaven case was a lesson in this, a reminder that the truth is not just something we find. It is something we live, something we build, and something we protect every single day as we navigate the complex, beautiful, and sometimes incredibly difficult journey of being human. The 1992 cold case had become a permanent part of the local consciousness. It was a touchstone for conversations about morality, about the role of the law, and about the nature of a community. People who had once been total strangers were now bound by the shared memory of the arrest and the trial. They talked about the changes in the town, about the new security measures, and about the shift in how they interacted with each other. It was a conversation that was still ongoing, a dialogue that was helping to define what it meant to be a resident of Oakhaven in the post-arrest era. And as they continued to talk, they were building a new kind of community, one that was perhaps a little less trusting, but also a little more aware, a little more engaged, and a little more prepared to deal with the realities of life. The detectives, while no longer on the ground, remained in contact with the families, checking in, providing support, and ensuring that they were doing okay. They knew that the resolution of the case was not the end of the road for them. The emotional weight of the loss was a lifelong journey, and they were, in their own way, a part of that journey. They had become more than just investigators. They had become partners in a shared, long-term process of healing. This was the most unexpected, and perhaps the most important, result of the investigation, the formation of a bond that went beyond the badge, beyond the evidence, and beyond the law. The case was a reminder that we are all, in our own way, a part of a larger story, one that is linked to the stories of others. Our lives are intertwined in complex, subtle, and profound ways, and our actions, whether they are known or unknown, have a lasting impact. The investigation, by bringing the truth into the light, had not just solved a case, it had reaffirmed the importance of our connections, the necessity of our support for one another, and the enduring and often life-saving power of the truth. The final reflection on the experience is that the truth is the most powerful tool we have in the pursuit of a just world. It is the key to resolution, the foundation for healing, and the only path forward. We must be willing to seek it, no matter how long it takes, and we must be willing to stand by it, no matter how hard it is. The story of the 1992 cold case is a testament to this, a powerful reminder that justice, when combined with dedication and truth, is always possible, and that no matter how long the silence may be, the truth will always, inevitably, find a way to speak. As the years continue to pass, the 1992 case will become an increasingly important part of the regional history. It will be studied by law enforcement, by historians, and by sociologists. It will be a case study in the power of modern forensics, the necessity of persistent investigation, and the endurance of the human spirit. But for the people of Oakhaven, it will always be more than a case study. It will be a personal, living part of their town, a memory that is still unfolding, still healing, and still, in its own way, finding its place in the world. The detective's final thoughts, as he looks back on his long and storied career, are that the case was the most difficult, the most challenging, and the most rewarding. It was a case that had challenged him, changed him, and forced him to confront the limits of his own knowledge, the boundaries of his own belief, and the depth of his own commitment to the truth. He realized that the mystery was not just about the evidence, but about the human element, the loss, and the importance of ensuring that the truth, no matter how small, no matter how obscure, is never ever forgotten. The 1992 cold case was solved, and with it, the community found its way out of the darkness. It was a journey that had been long, difficult, and full of pain, but it was a journey that had, in the end, brought them to a place of truth, a place of resolution, and a place where the memory of the victim could finally, truly be honored. The case was over, but the story, the memory, and the truth were eternal, a permanent part of the heartbeat of the town, and a testament to the fact that justice, in all its forms, is the ultimate goal of the human journey. The final word on the matter is that the truth, no matter how long it stays buried, will always find its way into the light. It is a fundamental law of human existence, and one that we must all respect, honor, and uphold. The 1992 cold case is a powerful testament to this truth, a story that reminds us that no matter how hard the path may be, no matter how long the wait may be, the truth will always prevail, and with it, justice will always find its place, anchoring our societies in the reality we share.